Now, I may be oblivious to, the culture. I'm not as hip as I once was when I was, an actual rapper or whatnot. But I was looking at this complex list. They're always making lists, and it always put people in an outrage. And there's a lot of people on this list that I don't know. It was top 25, hip hop platforms or media power ranking. And a lot of people up here I'm not necessarily familiar with. There was a couple people that I didn't see on there who I think should, like Speedy. And like I said, I don't follow everyone or familiar with everyone on the list, and that's no knock to them. I feel like I'm not the best hype man or person that, be up to date on every single thing. There's a lot of content out here. I mean, I'll be watching movies, shows, I don't just pay attention to hip hop and pop culture. But there was something that I was just looking at the Breakfast Club interview and DJ Vlad. Shout out to Vlad TV. I'm a fan. I definitely watch his interviews. I feel like he does deserve to be on that list. But he has said something, in slight of, Rory and Mal. And I guess they was talking about Adam 22 and how he wasn't on the list at all. And I didn't see him up there. It's, hey, it is what it is. I don't necessarily think that Adam 22 and the No Jumper podcast is, I don't want to say they're not hip hop. They're I don't think it's it's kind of tricky, because Angela Yee was up there along with, I think she was 20 something, and Charlemagne was number 5, right, higher, a little higher than, like, right above Vlad. And I hate when they say higher, like low and high, because when they do the list, they'll have that some lists will be from 25 on down to the 1, and then others will be like from 1 to 0. But I get it. But out of everybody that was on the list, and maybe he was just using it as an example, but he said he would put Adam 22 on the list over Rory and Mal. And Rory and Mal is number 9. They're lower than Vlad, lower than their former, friend and, co-host Joe Budden. But there's guys on this list. Like I said again, no slight to them. No slight to anybody that's on the list. Shout out to everybody who made the list. But it goes back again to like Complex and their antics, and like they'll put lists up there and they'd be like, oh wow, like what dictates this, what determines this, and I get it, but I don't see a problem with Adam 22 being on there. I don't see a problem with him not being on there. I mean, if he's a hip hop platform or hip hop media platform, I mean, hey, I don't know. I mean, just because you have rappers or managers and stuff up there doesn't necessarily mean that you're, a hip hop platform, whether they're underground or mainstream. And even with Big U and him being, in the mix with certain things. And that was another thing that I'm going to talk about in a second. But for me, it kind of made me feel away. Like, I listen to Rory and Mal. And the crazy thing is, I'm actually kind of surprised at myself because, like, I'm a Joe Budden fan. I've been a Joe Budden fan I was a Joe Budden fan for long, like for years, like before he was even doing podcasts. I was one of the guys that used to always like, hey, he's on my top 5, on my top 10, as a rapper. And then he had the podcast. And I'm not going to sit here and say I listened to every single podcast from episode 1 to episode 700 or whatever episode he's on now. I don't listen to Joe Budden as much as I used to. I'm actually more consistent in listening to Rory and Mal now, even though I didn't listen to all of their beginning episodes. But man, Damaris is fine. She fine, yo. But you know, it's kind of like, dang, you could have named anybody else besides Rory and Mal. And like I said again, it could just be another thing. Like maybe you like me, you're not familiar with every single person. But you know, even guys that was like from 25 to, you know, different things. Like I know, I'm not familiar with 24, 25. I mean, even with Nadeska, you know, Nadeska does her thing. I'm familiar with Nadeska. You know, I'm familiar with Ebro, Big Boy, Angela Yee, you know, Fat Joe and Jadakiss, and, you know, $1 million worth of game, of course. But, you know, you said Rory and Mal. And I'm like, I think they're a more power player than some of the other people that's on there. And it's not because, it could be because I'm not familiar with a lot of the other people, some of the other people up there, but like I said, I didn't see Speedy on it. I'm not exactly sure if like what his, you know, platform mainly is, but you know, Adam 22 versus Rory and Mal, and it's not a Rory and Mal versus Adam 22 thing. It was just something that that Vlad had said, and I was like, man, Vlad, you know, I don't know if that's just if that's your friend, like just because that's your friend, or if just be like he was talking like 1 minute he was like, you know, he doesn't chase viral moments or nothing, because he was talking about OJ, and you know he was trying to, you know, talking about like before he passed, they was trying to set an interview up, and I know that doesn't, you know, what Vlad doesn't make Adam 22 or the No Jump podcast crap, but it's like I don't know. I mean, there's just certain things that to me doesn't always correlate with hip hop. It's just like with the Diddy trial. You know what I'm saying? Like Diddy is a hip hop mogul, a hip hop legend, an icon, you know, who done crazy things, freaky things. And even with the video with Cass, it's like, you know, that was his artist, that was his girlfriend that, you know, he was controlling. But I don't feel like the Diddy trial itself was hip hop, even though he's a hip hop producer, hip hop manager, whatever. I mean, certain things doesn't correlate with the other thing. It's just like with R. Kelly. Like R. Kelly, you know, what he did, you know, it doesn't correlate with his artistry, is all I'm saying. And sometimes because they are an artist, sometimes it's kind of hard to separate them. It's just like with Michael Jackson, like rest in peace to Michael Jackson, the greatest, the best, the greatest of all time. Rest in peace to him. Just like when he caught that trial, I mean, it was international news. And it could have been because he was Michael Jackson and he was a big star, but that didn't have anything to do with his artistry. So I think sometimes even when we talk about hip hop platforms, you know, it can be whether it's news or you're breaking an artist or whatever it is. Like if it has anything to do with the artist, you know, you might say this is hip hop news, and I don't agree with it. But that's just me. You know, this is just an observation. It's not an opinion. It's just an observation. But, you know, one thing, you know, apparently there's a lot of things that's going on that I'm unaware of. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and act like that I'm, you know, not aware about certain things. But like I said, I like what I like. I pay attention to what I want to pay attention to. You know, even with $1 million worth of game, shout out to Wallow and Gilly. You know, that's, that's a thing as well. They're a hip hop platform. And the thing, they had Shannon Sharpe up there, and I understand that he's a black, former black, I was about to say Taylor, and he's a, former NFL player, and he had a lot of, he had got a lot of notoriety after the Cat Williams interview, who I feel like Cat Williams is part of the hip hop culture, but it's like, there's different layers of it, even with Shannon Sharpe. I mean, hip hop is pop culture, but we gotta remember, like, Shannon Sharpe's up there, but Cam Newton isn't. I feel like Shannon Sharpe, because of the Cat Williams interview, he done interviews before, like he's been doing interviews before the Cat Williams, but last year, like, that was like a big year. Just this, in my opinion, had Cat Williams, had Monique, had, I think he had John Cena on this year. I think he had he had a lot of people. But even like with Cam Newton, I mean, is he hip hop? Is he a hip hop platform? So like, there's a lot of people on this list, and again, this goes back into popular people. Like, there's some people who are more popular than others, but just in my opinion, like, Complex do these lists, and they can have their criteria, but I feel like a lot of times they know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I feel like it can be they'll genuinely put the people up there, but it's like, there's people on the list that I probably won't put on the list, and there's other people on the list that probably need to be lower or higher. But it goes back again to where it's like, I'm just one person. It's just me. Like, I don't, I pay attention to a lot of the underground things. I pay attention to a lot of the popular things, but it's just certain things that kind of like stood out. And then that's just another thing, just as far as like what culture is. Hip hop is part of black culture, but hip hop is pop culture. Hip hop is the biggest culture under religion, because religion is a culture. You have the Nation of Islam, which is more like, a unit, and they have, the Muslims, the Christians, all those things. I remember Marlon said something on one of his previous episodes. Hip hop is the biggest culture in the world, in the States. And I'm like, no, there's no bigger culture than God's culture. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Christian. That's just what it is. But again, I understand it's cool, but like, hip hop can be more than one thing, but it goes back again to, like, even when we talk about black culture, we talk about, cookouts. I'm not going to sit here and say that every culture doesn't have cookouts, but, cookouts is part of black culture. Family reunions is part of black culture. Jazz, R&B, hip hop, these are all part of black culture. Black culture is broader than, just music. But even with, criminals, like the crimes, like, people can box us in and be like, killing, murder, like the streets is part of black culture. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and act like that black people are the only people from the street, but we're the ones who kind of talks about it more. The hoods, the ghettos, unfortunately, that, I mean, I ain't gonna necessarily say that's culture, but it's just like, street culture and hood culture, that's part of black culture too. But, there's a lot of positive as well. Like I mentioned, you got the music, the cookouts, the family reunions, a lot of those things. Like, and again, it might just be because I pay attention more to my culture than any other culture. So I don't know if, white people or the Hispanics, Latinos, and, the Indians and everybody. I mean, I'm sure they do have reunions as well, but it just goes back again to what's in the proximity. I mean, I got a lot of world to see. I haven't been out of the States. I haven't been out of the States at all, but it's just certain things like, what is culture? Like if I was to define culture, and it goes back again, I'm not one of those people who try to make my own definition up, but it's a way of life of a group of people encompassing their beliefs, customs, and traditions passed down through generations. So it's like the language, behaviors, rituals, faith, religion. So it's like Christianity, Muslim, all those things can be part of Black culture, but then it's like there's different chains. So my thing is, I'm not saying that a lot of the white hosts or the Asian hosts who's part of the hip hop culture isn't in the culture or even other culture, but when I get older and I realize certain things, it's like, I mean, yeah, like Eminem. Eminem's hip hop culture. He's white, but he's hip hop culture. Vlad, he does his interviews, and I don't think he just do artists. He does a lot of other things. He's part of, hip hop culture. They can be for the culture, other culture. They can be part of the culture, but it's just certain things. Like, I don't like to compartmentalize people. I don't like to, be like, I'm not a gatekeeper. I don't dictate anything. I only dictate my life and what I have going on. But even like what I say, like before, like when I was, more fluid or more focused on what was going on in, pop culture and, entertainment, I was hip hop. Like I was discussing things outside hip hop, but like I said, hip hop is now part of pop culture. But it goes back again. Instead of pop culture, you have the Taylor Swifts, the Justin Biebers. They can all like transcend and cross brand. But like I said, hip hop is pop culture, and pop culture isn't hip hop culture, but hip hop is pop culture because hip hop had transcended to a broader scale. Like hip hop is still one of the newer genres. So for us to start in the late 70s on to the 2000s, it's remarkable. But it goes back again to where I believe that, rock and roll, whether it's Kid Rock, Limp Bizkit, they was able to, bring their rock style, to, they would rap and stuff. So it's like that's transcending. Or even when, Drake or Beyonce collab with these pop artists or even make pop sounding songs, Nicki Minaj and all these things, they come over to, pop culture and it becomes pop culture. So we have to remember like hip hop is a big part of the world. And I just wanted to express that because I feel like sometimes we will discredit someone because of their race, and we shouldn't do that. But sometimes we have to acknowledge that, hey, like just because you're putting something in a community or giving opportunities to people of different communities, you're part of it. When to me, I don't agree. I don't believe, I feel like there's a lot of things that we are owed just as, a culture in general, just whether black culture, hip hop culture, we're owed a lot. We all like we made Gucci hot. We made Louis Vuitton hot, even though they was already, what they are, but like because of the artists like the art. Let's not. It's the brand that make the artist hot. The artist made the brands hot. Even like with certain, no certain organizations like McDonald's, they had a partnership with Sweetie and rallies and like all these artists, Sweetie, Cardi B, Megan, they have their own meal at these fast food joints. Even though I feel like hey, that's they can be unhealthy, but um, I just some certain things just kind of like, man, maybe I need to pay a little bit more attention though. And I'm gonna stay that like I care about what I care about. And even with R&B money, like R&B money, I've seen a few episodes, and I mean I would probably say that they're part of they're still part of hip hop culture, even though they're like R&B, but R&B and hip hop they're like brother and sister. You know what I'm saying? They like Ray J and Brandy. They're like they're no they're oh that's kind of dope. Ray and Brand. That yeah. So that's but again, I'm just a man, stating some observations. But that was just certain something I wanted to discuss. Like I wanna there's a few people that I actually want to talk to on here. And I'm not gonna give it away yet, but I wanna, reach out to, a couple artists, a couple acts and just kinda like talk to them. You know what I'm saying? Like one more thing as well, like wrestling. A lot of hip hop artists. I mean, a lot of rock stars, a lot of pop stars. I mean, they all go like wrestling is another culture as well. But they're all they kind of like go together. Wrestling incorporated a lot of different music, a lot of different cultures, and vice versa. So I mean, I don't want to get too much into that, but I think about Master P, who was in WCW in like the '90s, and he had his thing with the Filthy Animals. That's Rey Mysterio, Kidman. Um, man, that was a time, yo. And even like with you know guys now like John Cena, Cody Rhodes. It's like these guys are part like their wrestling culture, but they embrace the hip hop culture. They embrace the the black community and stuff. So it's it's different things, but that's neither here nor there. But that's just something that I wanted to address. You know what I'm saying? Like I've been writing like nonstop. I got like so much music that I've been releasing, and it hasn't even been me singing or rapping, but it's just like me just writing it. Like I've been using the Suno app. Shout out to Suno. Shout out to Timbaland. But I'm just like, man, I contribute, but it's like I want my credit, but I don't want the attention. If that makes sense. Like I'm cool with my little, bit of, you know, contribution. I feel like, my body of work that I've been releasing lately has been remarkable. But like I said, I'm a lyrics type person. I want people to enjoy the songs, but also know the word, like understand the words. Like I'm not a performing artist. I'm just a songwriter. I just, write the songs, write the lyrics or whatever. And then, now since I'm not doing, beats right now, I allowed Suno to, do like make the record. Like I just all I do is just write the song and then I'll do the prompt and then it comes out. But they sound great. Like I said, I pay attention and make things that I like to listen to. So some people might see influences and everything, but it's like, everybody is influenced by something. But when I create, sometimes I'm not inspired to, but I do it and then I'll get inspired. Sometimes we just have to flow and just do things. But like I said, some things aren't culture, but it goes back again. Like sometimes it's not about that. It's like if you're hip hop or you have a platform, sometimes a platform might not even necessarily be the culture itself. But it goes back again, like, well, what is culture? Like, what is culture to you? Because I always think, my culture is God. My culture is Jesus Christ. I'm in the hip hop culture. I'm in the black culture. I'm in all these different cultures. But the number one culture that I'm in is, Christian culture. Whether I'm in church, whether I go to the events, but it's like that's just part of the culture I'm in. So it's like I'm leaning more towards like the inspirational things, the positive things, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Christians or God and all these things are all positive. It should be positive, but all of it isn't. And I think that's what kind of sometimes it trickles down. But maybe I'm wrong on that as well, because all things good is God. So if it's not good, if it's not positive, if it's not peaceful, if it's not uplifting, if it's not encouraging, then it might not be part of God culture. Like, you can be talking about God, but it's not part of the religious culture. Like I said, everything doesn't have to line up with that. Even with the podcast, with this podcast, it's about culture, but it's about relationships. A lot of times I talk about fatherhood. A lot of times I talk about personal relationships that I didn't have. A lot of times I might be talking about, scripture or biblical and things, but mainly it's just, it's about the relationships. And I think that's the thing. Everything there's always going to be that relationship. So I just try to stay on task. I try to stay influenced by God and moved by God. Everything is not going to be what you want it to be. Some things that I do isn't for God, it's for you, the listeners. And I've always wanted, people to voice their opinion and give me feedback and like just share their thoughts. But like I said, Complex, they did another one. They'll probably have another one up next month when they talk like, I guess Complex is hip hop because they're making all these lists regarding hip hop, but it's like they might be just music, but hip hop is the biggest. I agree with Maul on that. Is the biggest music culture, but maybe not the biggest culture generally. But it is what it is. But that's just me. That's just my observation. But like I said, as always, be safe, stay productive, and positive. This is Blair. I'm out.